Hey everyone, this is Nadia and welcome back to my channel where I talk about learning to code and building a career in tech. So I moved from Poland to London for a job as a software engineer almost exactly a year ago. And I recently received this question that got me thinking. So the question was whether I regret moving from Poland to London. So I thought I would record the answer to this question. So, do I regret this move? Absolutely not. That's the whole video. Thank you for watching. Seriously though, during this year of living in London, I've never really had a moment where I was seriously regretting the decision to move. For context, I had a pretty good run in Poland, I would say. So I spent 3 years living there, first in Warsaw, then in Krakow, and I'm originally from Belarus. So the time I spent there was pretty nice. I had an easy time getting used to the culture, to the country, and I understood how it worked very quickly. I learned the language fluently. I was very successful in my career there, so this was the place where I started my new career as a software engineer, and I was able to work at some interesting companies and get some valuable experience. And overall, it was a pretty nice time. However, the time came for me to decide whether I see Poland as a long-term place for me to live, and the answer sadly was no. So why did I think this way? So first of all, when I was moving to Poland, I was moving there on the assumption that each year life in Poland would be getting better and better, and people would be becoming wealthier and wealthier, and overall that things would be improving. However, this is not what happened, and towards the end of my stay there, I was kind of getting this feeling that has been proven correct, that things would be deteriorating year over year, and this was certainly not something that I wanted to experience myself. I think that economically the country was on the wrong track, and I didn't really feel like there were any signs for me to hope that something would change and something would go in the other direction. However, apart from kind of economic and political reasons, I think that every country has its own problems, and usually people can make peace with some of them and kind of ignore them. There were things that I really couldn't ignore that made my life really difficult and even sort of unbearable in Poland. One of those things was actually air pollution. This is something that shocks people when I tell them that here in London. So when I tell somebody that Poland is one of the most polluted countries in Europe, people have trouble believing me, because even if they're familiar with air pollution in China or India, and even if they heard horror stories of people going outside in winter and just vomiting because the air was so dirty, they have never heard this about Poland. And I think that there is this idea that if countries in the European Union, there are like certain standards that are there, or something like that. However, Poland is indeed very polluted, and I really struggled with air pollution in winter. Usually air starts getting polluted around October, and then it goes all the way up to April. And the air is not like polluted all the time, but there are bouts of really bad air pollution that can run up to like 11 days. When you cannot open the window, you can't really go outside. I mean, you can, but you have to wear this special anti-pollution mask that is very, very hard to breathe in. And if, for instance, for me, if I would go outside without this mask, then I would get sick, I would get a fever, and this was just such a mess. So I felt a lot of short-term effects of air pollution on me, but also there were obviously long-term effects that I didn't want to test out. So this was one of the reasons that kind of pushed me. I think that this was like the primary reason that pushed me over the edge and kind of made me decide that, okay, I need to relocate. And the process of choosing where to relocate, it wasn't very straightforward. Ultimately, London became the final decision and kind of the destination that I choose. It wasn't very obvious that I would come to London, but ultimately I believe that this was the best place possible where I could have gone at that point in time. So why do I like London so much? Honestly, this is a weird reason, and this is something that I wouldn't have anticipated before. I had never been in London before I came here, and also I didn't really have an experience of living in a huge city. So when I came here, I discovered that I actually feel less lonely here than I did when I was living in a smaller town like Krakow in Poland, which is strange. But however, I think that it also makes sense. What helps me feel less lonely in London is the fact that it's a city of immigrants. Everybody here is an immigrant, not just me. The thing that bothered me a little bit about Poland was that it used to be still a very mono-ethnic country, which has obviously changed right now. My experience was that I've always been the only recent immigrant on the teams that I've worked on, and I've always felt like the other, quote unquote. If you're an immigrant, you probably know this feeling. If you're not, then it's very hard to explain. But you know this feeling when you have this, when you're the only person who looks different maybe, or who has an accent, who doesn't speak the language properly, who doesn't get the cultural references that people make around you and all of that. This did make me feel a little bit isolated when I was living in Poland. And this is something that I hadn't really experienced here in London, because the first day when I landed in London, I saw that, oh my God, actually my weird accent that I always like, which I always was very conscious about in Poland, is actually not that weird here, because in fact people speak English in a myriad of ways here, and you will hear every possible accent, every possible way to use and misuse English, and it's just the way things go here. So it has been very easy for me to meet new people, immigrants from Eastern Europe, immigrants from other countries in the world. It's been easier to connect with them on the topic of being immigrants. We've talked a lot about like loneliness and isolation, and this is overwhelmingly what people tell me, is that so like somebody lived in with Sweden before moving to London, and they did feel that London is a much better place to be if you're an immigrant. So when I was living in Poland, I had this strange experience when I was riding the bus, and it was full of people, and all of them were speaking Polish, which, you know, kind of makes sense because this was Poland. However, I would sometimes get this intense feeling of loneliness and intense feeling of just wanting somebody to speak Russian, my native language, and this disconnect between me and my culture was so strong at moments. And honestly, I've never really felt it here in London. I think that here, you know, if you miss hearing Russian, you can just go to St. James's Park and you will, within 2 minutes, you will hear somebody speaking Russian. For instance, for me, one thing that is also important is getting access to food that I'm used to. So here again, I can find a Polish grocery store very easily and kind of get the food that I had become used to during the last 3 years. So things like food and getting to talk to people in your own language, those things are very, very easy to get here, which in turn means that you are less isolated. You don't feel like the other. You don't feel like you're a weird immigrant. You just feel like everyone else. And honestly, I've never expected this to be such a powerful feeling, but it is. It has improved the quality of my life substantially. So if you're an immigrant, this is definitely something that you should consider. Another thing that I really appreciate about London is, in general, the British culture of trust. The fact that here everybody assumes the best about people. There is this assumption that, you know, we all trust each other, and a lot of the things that are possible here wouldn't really be a thing, I think, in Eastern Europe. So like, I'm from Eastern Europe, so I think I'm allowed to criticize it. So I think that some things just wouldn't fly there. Because Eastern European societies are just not, they don't have this level of trust that people have for each other here. So one thing that I think wouldn't really fly in Eastern Europe and works perfectly well here in the UK is that, for instance, if you get sick, you don't actually need to have a formal doctor's note to get time off work. This is called self-certification, so you can just call your boss or message them or whatever and just tell them that you're not feeling well enough for work, and this is it, this is enough. And then if you are sick for a longer period of time, then you will need to get a doctor's note. And this is absolutely incredible. The assumption is that people trust each other. The assumption is that nobody would misuse it or overuse it. And this is just one example of things that work here. And, you know, initially it's very hard to get used to it. I think that I'm still learning to accept the fact that this is a society where people trust each other, where I'm not in a danger of being taken advantage of. This is something that I really appreciate about this country and the city. Something else that's pretty incredible is that how much of the stuff that I need to do can be done online. So things related to visas, residence permits, taxes, and other things related to the government, they can all be done online. I haven't really had a necessity to go to a government office to apply for something or to file some documents, which has been pretty incredible. And also in terms of things like fintech and banking, obviously there are legacy banks which are not good, but also there is so many apps that you can use for finance, and London is the kind of the capital of fintech, and a lot of the fintech apps that are available here are pretty amazing. It sounds odd, but I will say it, weather in London is pretty freaking amazing. I had never been in London before I moved here a year ago, but I had this idea and those stereotypes of British weather, that it's very rainy, it rains all the time, that it's very cold and dark and just overall disgusting. I think that people complain about British food and British weather, and like, sorry, but British food is actually pretty bad. But British weather, it is great. So I can't say that the weather has been the same during winter and summer, because I know that this is something that sometimes been said, because we had this weird heat wave this summer that broke all the records of temperature, but also during the winter there was a week when it was pretty cold, and I had to borrow a winter coat in winter. So I moved to Poland without a winter coat, and I was planning to buy it here, but I just saw that there was no necessity for it. So this was the first winter in my life where I didn't need a winter coat or winter boots, and I just could use lighter clothes during the whole year. And then summer, most of summer is just nice warm weather, or maybe not that warm, where you can maybe wear like a light coat or something like that, which is, pretty nice for me. I like this kind of sort of summer. After years of heat waves in Central Europe or Eastern Europe, this is something that I really appreciate. And the fact that it's so warm in winter, it means that everything is always blooming in London, and this was also unexpected for me. So you would see green grass in December, you would find something blooming in December or in January, and then end of January, just the most incredible thing happens. You will see trees starting to bloom. End of January, February, this is when it gets going, and then March and April, just you will see beauty that you probably had never seen before. So this is definitely, I think, the best time to visit London. And then as we move forward to the summer, like something else blooms, and then something else, and there are the waves of just flowers blooming and blooming. And then when you think, okay, then it's over finally, and then there is like the season of roses, and there are roses everywhere. And I think that for me, again, I was very used to this concept of like the weather is usually bad, there is snow for half a year, and then you have like 5 minutes when everything is blooming, and then it's just hot. And here everything is so mild, and there is a lot of beauty and a lot of aesthetics in the city and in the nature. And this is also something that I find pretty incredible with London, is how much nature exposure you get here, and how many flowers and how many trees and bushes and all of that stuff you see everywhere. It's just incredible, improves your quality of life so much. Another thing that I didn't expect to say about London is that London is actually very pretty. So one of the cities where I considered moving was Paris, and I love Paris. I think it is an incredibly beautiful city. And my research into London, watching vlogs and doing some search on Google Maps, it led me to dread coming here, and I was very scared that I would hate it and that I would spend the whole time here just regretting not moving to Paris. Honestly, this has never happened to me. I have just been really feeling lucky that I've chosen London for a bunch of reasons. But in terms of aesthetics and beauty, I think that London is it's so huge that here you can find anything. You can find any kind of aesthetic that you like. A lot of London is really ugly, and when I arrived, the first area where I stayed, it was called Willesden, and it was so disgusting that I tried to keep a brave face, and I tried to stay positive, but still I was really scared that this is what London was like. And then I was very lucky to have a chance to live in various areas in London. A lot of them were very beautiful. They were beautiful in their own way. But overall, I think that there is a chance here to find places that appeal to you and to your sense of aesthetics. Like, the only limit is, of course, like money and how expensive certain areas are. But other than that, you can gain access to beauty, and you can get places that you enjoy, and you can hopefully build your life in areas that you personally like. Yeah, this is something that I didn't expect to happen, but London turned out to be really beautiful. But honestly, I think the biggest thing that makes me really grateful and happy that I chose London as a place to move is that the access to opportunities that you get here is quite unlike anything that I have experienced. I had never lived in a big city before, so maybe if you have lived in big cities with a lot of opportunities, this is something that you take for granted. But I have spent most of my life living in provincial cities, and when I came here, I was just shocked at how much stuff is happening here. And when I say stuff, I mean everything. I mean work, I mean entertainment. So entertainment like sports, art, museums. If you're interested in entrepreneurship or business, there are meetups for entrepreneurs that are happening like maybe not every day, but every week something is happening. If you go on Meetup and search for things that interest you, you will see that you have something, somewhere to go every day. Sometimes there are several things that you can do. There are plays and there are ballets and operas, and like all of this stuff is happening all the time, and kind of the best things that exist in the world, you can get access to them here. A lot of the stuff that's happening is for free. A lot of it is like very, very expensive. However, you still have this opportunity to enjoy it, which I didn't really have before, and this is something that makes me feel so incredibly grateful and so incredibly lucky. So yeah, everything is happening in London. I think sometimes I feel that too much is happening, and I just don't have enough time and energy to absorb all of that, and it's something absolutely incredible. And even though I moved to London pretty late, I still feel that this is all just the beginning. And if I have to talk about regrets, I think that the only regret that I have is that I didn't move to London earlier. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.